Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cryptic Humility. I am here with our guest speaker.
Lars Johnson.
Thank you so much, Lars, for coming to the podcast. We're very excited to have you. And actually, my last guest speaker was very interested in hearing about what you're doing now. I had mentioned that we were having a next guest speaker talking about your startup, your business idea, and what you're involved with crypto. He was really interested in it. I actually gave him your LinkedIn in case he wanted to connect with you. But of course, some people are very curious to hear about what you're doing in the industry. So without further ado, I want to pass you the torch. Feel free to go into your background, where you started, how you ended up in crypto, and just give people kind of an idea of why you are where you are today.
Sure. Thank you. So I went to school at Florida Tech and studied space sciences because at the time they said everyone at like 50% of NASA retirements of NASA scientists were within 5 years of retiring. And that seemed like the perfect time to get in. And then when I graduated, they said, well, they're going to be leaving, but there will be no backfills. Good luck. That was 2008 when the markets crashed and everything went bad. So I was like, all right. And I got involved doing some work for a security firm. And then after a couple of years of doing that, I transitioned up to New York and went to work for AT&T in the chief security office. I was part of a research team that was geared or tasked with looking in like the 3 to 5 year out range and kind of given some pretty wide range in terms of like what I wanted to study and how it could impact us. And so I started looking into click fraud. And I was talking with a colleague over at Xander, which is a company that doesn't exist anymore. He said, well, we don't really have a problem with click fraud, but blockchain is what everybody's talking about now. I said, all right, well, let's see if I can figure out how to solve some of their problems with blockchain. So I put together a proof of concept and I started coding, writing in Python and saying, all right, this is how it would work. This was this new type of blockchain and this is what I want to do with it. And I said, that's great. Let's get a team together to actually build out a demo product that we could pitch. And so we put the team together, we created this product, and then AT&T started divesting everything. And that product and the patent for it kind of just sat on the shelf. But I kind of had this feeling like, okay, there's a lot of other stuff that I could do within blockchain that would be interesting and helpful and help promote security. And so I continued writing a handful of patents for different things around blockchain and security and identity and access management and different use cases around it. Then kind of started getting away from that. And this spring, I had the opportunity to take basically a severance package and leave AT&T. And I had told my boss, listen, if the opportunity comes up, I have a company I want to start. And getting a severance package is awesome for hitting the ground running. So when he told me that I was being let go, he was like, you're the first happy person I've talked to about this. I was like, this is great. I can finally go and do my project. And so, at that point, I started this and I was like, okay, I need to come up with a name. I need to come up with everything for it. But in the back of my mind, I knew the idea that I wanted. And so it started with this idea that with a lot of starting with Bitcoin, when you process a transaction, you have to go out and create this. You say, this is the transaction I want to process. And then you wait for somebody else to put it into a bucket and then it gets approved as a transaction. And then once it's been approved as a transaction, it can be added to a block. And then once it's been added to a block and you've added a couple more blocks to make sure that everybody agrees that this transaction really did happen, then you can kind of move forward from there. I was like, there's a better way. And I started looking into, all right, how are people doing sharding? How are people trying to make this faster? And what I realized was that the easiest way to make it faster was to make a unique set of chains for every single asset. So every coin has its own blockchain. But obviously, when there's only two people and you don't trust the other person, there's not enough trust. And so I figured out, okay, we need trusted banks. But we don't want them to have all the information. So how can we limit the information that the banks have and allow the users to still have all of the information? So I came up with your coin, which I'll start walking through.
And actually, before you do, let me backtrack to ask a question for the audience. So because the main point is to try to teach beginners as well. So in blockchain is trying to pitch this idea of transparency, and on Bitcoin's blockchain for confirmations and consensus mechanism, it's Bitcoin mining. So you're saying that you're trying to find a better solution to Bitcoin mining, essentially, or even like proof of stake or just other consensus mechanisms. You're looking for a better way to do this.
Right. So my thinking was that in any given transaction, there are only really three people, 2 to 3 people who care. Whether it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, whether it's proof of work, proof of stake, it doesn't matter. It's the person spending the coins, the person receiving the coins, and the miner. And so in my head, I said, or I thought, what if one of the 2 people involved in the transaction is the one who does the mining? And what if we said we don't need these third-party miners? Well, you still need some sort of consensus. And so that's where the bank comes in. But yeah, the idea was, what other method could we use to you're still mining a block, you're still forming consensus about the people who care about the transaction, but saying nobody else needs to know. And so like if you and I were to download the Bitcoin ledger today, we could both look at it and we would find all of the exact same transactions from the very first through the well-known pizza delivery,
Right.
through everything that's happened ever since. And we would see the exact same thing, because that's how consensus works in Bitcoin, is everybody has the same thing and everybody's looking at the same set of coins and the same set of transactions. In my model, I wanted to get away from that, because I thought that's a lot of waste. When you're sharing that much information about everything with everybody, it takes a long time to get everybody on the same page. And I was thinking, for an individual transaction, most people don't care. And so it was like, if I go to the grocery store and I'm buying groceries and it comes out to $100, they're going to take out a marker and kind of draw on the $100 bill and make sure that it's real. They'll look at the strip and make sure that it's a real $100 bill. But the person in line behind me doesn't care. The person who left before me doesn't care. As long as the money was real, the store doesn't care. Nobody cares where I got the money from or where it's going afterwards. It's just, I care about it. The grocery store cares about it. And that's it. And so I wanted to kind of replicate that in a digital transaction.
That was a really good analogy, by the way. I feel like that really pieced together a deeper understanding of what you're trying to achieve. And just to reiterate, yeah, you're trying to eliminate all these third-party people, even more third-party people, which is like the whole essential point of blockchain, is try to remain decentralized as we're verifying and functioning transactions and stuff on the blockchain. So you're taking that a step even further and taking out everybody who really doesn't care about it. And for example, you and I transacting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but making one of us, for example, the one that's verifying the transaction that's happening.
Correct.
Amazing. Keep going.
Yeah. So I'll go through this walkthrough, and I think it helps to kind of paint a picture of how it works. And then we can kind of jump into whatever questions you have about it at the end.
Perfect.
And then hopefully we'll get into some more future-based questions about security and blockchain after that.
Right.
I mean, like I said, I called it your coin. It's these peer-to-peer transactions where I don't want it going out to a group. I don't want multiple people looking at things. So it really is just peer-to-peer, and that's the extent of the transaction. Each coin represents an actual deposit at a bank. So if you put $100 into choose your favorite bank, and that $100 is sitting there earning interest, that $100 is the backing for that coin. And so because of that, and that $100 staying at that bank, security gets a little bit easier, fraud reduction gets a little bit easier, and I'll get into how some of that works. Since you and I are doing the transaction, and it's a fairly simple transaction, a fairly simple hashing algorithm, you don't have to wait. We're not waiting for somebody else to verify something and then somebody else to add it to a block. It's just the transaction. I say, hey, here's my coin. You say, great. This is what your coin would look like if it came to me. And I tell the bank that. And so it really is a couple of handshakes, and then the transaction is complete. Like I said, the money stays at the bank. It doesn't go from bank to bank to bank. The money clears faster than with a lot of non-blockchain related peer-to-peer transactions. And one of the nice things that we finally recognized was, there are a lot of people who spend, a lot of their money is cash. They go to the bodega. I live in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Pass by 6 bodegas on the way to work any day, and that's just always cash, and it's just small transactions. There's a lot of people then who are using cash both to buy things and receiving cash, and they don't have any way to really track that in any meaningful manner. And so there's a couple of things. One, it's really great to be able to prove that you're earning income, and being able to prove that, track that, and be able to prove it to the government when it comes time to pay your taxes, being able to say, look, this was the money I earned for work. This was a garage sale that I had, and I'm not paying income tax on a garage sales, or whatever the income tax implications are of different cash transactions. But so being able to prove that you're earning money so that you can rent an apartment, so you can buy a car, so you can do whatever it is that you were not able to prove because you were just using cash. Similarly, when you're spending money, small amounts, often repeating at similar places, that's very valuable to advertisers. We're getting into an age where people don't want to share, or people are noticing that third parties are sharing their information. So if you and I
Right.
talk about something through a particular email channel or through a social media channel, and all of a sudden we start seeing ads about that, and we're like, who sold our information about this? Well, what if you are the one who could sell your information about something, so that all of a sudden you can say, I have a video streaming service that I pay $10 a month for. It's ad supported. But if I sell them my first party information about where I actively spend money, can I get it for free? I'm still getting ads, but I'm getting now ads that are targeted to me, that are better ads that I'm essentially profiting from, because it's covering the cost of the video service. And so I wanted to be able to track the cash spend, to be able to give people a way to monetize that for themselves.
And also, if I could just say, and our last guest speaker kind of mentioned this, so I want to mention it. I think it's really good to be getting banks involved into blockchain and crypto and stuff, because we see so many traditional banks kind of steer away from crypto, and we're driving such a wedge in that. And even if it's not traditional banks, just what you're doing, I think, is essential for the evolution of DeFi and also just regular banking, to kind of include them into crypto and also secure a blockchain even more with more legitimacy. So I think what you're doing makes sense. I think it's needed, and I think just people getting that understanding and that connection is so important. So
thanks. Yeah, I mean, I have said from the beginning, your coin, the website is yourcoin.info, and I've talked to different investors, and they're like, .info. Nobody's gonna find that. And I was like, I don't want them to know what your coin is. Like, that should matter to the banks who are going to be using it. It shouldn't be something that any consumer ever sees. And they're like, oh, well, then it makes sense. You don't need to know that. And I think that the banks are definitely in a position where they need some way to make money off of cryptocurrencies, and at the same time provide, in exchange for service. And banks are really good at a couple of things. They're really good at gaining interest. They have a large user base that's already baked in. They are super regulated, so they have all sorts of expertise around how to control this situation, how to control the narrative, and how to promote security. And they have incredible amounts of money invested already in identity and access management. They want to know who is using their credit cards where. They want to know who is doing everything. And so they've invested a ton of money and time into that, securing that ecosystem. And if we can take advantage of that, and the security of blockchain as to basically cover the cash aspects of it, then we're going to be in really good shape, I think.
100%. And actually, I'm sorry, I've just been thinking in the back of my mind. There's a joke on the podcast that I used to work at the bank. So anytime I can reference the bank, I always talk about it because it's a huge learning experience to like a stepping stone to crypto is understanding how the banks function and what they're doing and how they regulate things to kind of understand why we would become more decentralized against the bank. But also, I really like what you're doing because you're trying to include them. But what they are really good at is identifying where to make profits, where to, they collect fees off a ton of people, and they're very, very good at managing and tracking where money is going. So absolutely, I think your idea is really good. And I think it will kind of help defeat a lot of the fraud that's going on that we're going to talk about. I definitely have some questions later on to ask you about blockchain and fraudulent cybersecurity and stuff like that. But let's hear about how this functions.
Yeah. So each coin is on its own. It's independent of any other coin or any other part of the ecosystem. And for each coin, there's three ledgers. There's the transaction ledger, the proofs ledger, and the ownership ledger. And I'll go into what each of those are. So the transaction ledger is what the user holds. It's the proof that you are the owner of the coin. It's the proof that it's real, that it came from a bank that people should trust, and that it's valid. And each block is made kind of, it doesn't have a Merkle tree the way that a Bitcoin does. So you're not blending transactions to get something that's even harder to fake, but you are, because there's just one transaction. So there's no blending that needs to happen. But it is the full transaction ledger of every transaction from the time where somebody deposited money at the bank until it's reached you. And that lives on, whether it would be your banking app, it could live in a cloud wallet, it doesn't really matter where it lives. You could almost print it out in theory. The next up is the proofs ledger. And that's the first one that's held by the bank. It has the hash of every block within the transaction ledger. And so if we're having a transaction between us, which I'll go through, you would want to know, are the transactions that show up in the transaction ledger real? Does the bank agree with them? And this is how you check that. And then the last one is the ownership ledger, which isn't, ledger's a big word for it. It's just the public key of the current owner, just to make sure that, I really do have this and I really can sell it. And I didn't find some sort of, I didn't find a collision. I didn't make something up that just happened to work.
Right.
So like I said, the chains are interdependent because you use one or the other to prove the first. And when you put them all together, you can verify that this coin that started off when Alice put $20 into the bank, and it's now with Charlie, it's real. From beginning to end, it was $20, and it's always been that way. So a transaction, user one and user two, just as two people, where user one's giving them a coin to user two. So user one gives the current version of the transaction ledger. User two examines the whole thing and says, all right, these are real, or they look real. I will verify that in a minute. But so if it is real, then I want to be the new owner of it. So I would create a block, or user two would create a block that says, all right, user one gave me the block at this time, and the resulting hash was X. One thing with hashing that I want to go into, I know it's a word that comes up a lot in cryptocurrencies, and not necessarily everybody understands what it is, but it's, you take some amount of data, pass it through a function, and you get a very specific formatted response out. With Bitcoin, that the hashing algorithm has to start with a certain number of zeros. That's called the difficulty level, to be able to figure out, is this the winning block? And most of the time, it's not. There's all of these statistics about how much energy is wasted on just lost hashes that aren't valid, so they don't become the winning hash. And that's just energy that's gone forever. With mine, there is no difficulty. So whatever the first hash is correct. So it's easy enough that you can solve it on a phone. Some high-level mathematicians could solve it on paper and pencil.
Right.
I couldn't. but
You know,
your phone is definitely strong enough to.
I want to say too, that's a huge problem in Bitcoin is being the verification process of transactions. And Bitcoin actually, I know Bitcoin has layer two now and stuff like that, but the primary problem was payment processing, if you will, and verifying transactions and the speed of that. And a lot of that was all the computing power and energy usage that goes into Bitcoin mining to actually find the matching or missing hash. So,
Right.
and we've talked about that a little bit on the podcast. So like some of our newbies here should be somewhat familiar, but I'm glad that you're explaining it, because what you're saying is that you wouldn't have to be doing all this computing to be finding a hash anymore. What is computed or generated would be the missing hash, correct?
Right. Yeah.
That's so much easier, so much faster, and completely less energy intensive. So, and actually that's one of the questions I was going to ask you is how is your company, your idea, this blockchain, how is it going to be better than the other ones? And that's a prime example, is that you're essentially trying to eliminate everything that's wrong with Bitcoin mining, pretty much.
Yeah. But
Right.
keep all the good things from it, because
Right.
it really is, it solves a difficult problem, and it works. The issue is that there are a lot of miners, and so they have to have this competition, and the goal is to do it in exactly 10 minutes plus or minus, roughly, I guess, 10 minutes. So I wanted to get away from that, and obviously I'm not the first person who wanted to get away from that. You'd mentioned proof of stake earlier in our conversation, and so proof of stake, the person who owns, who has the most money has the highest chance of being selected to solve the next block. But in this ecosystem, where there's, for this particular chain, there is only one person who has any money. It's the person who currently owns this chain, and you don't want that person to have all the power. So it's almost like proof of intended stake, where it's the person who's going to get it. They're the ones who care the most in the world that it's valid and right. So they're the ones who get to solve it.
I love that. And in the show, we talk about proof of stake and how the problem with proof of stake can be centralization. Because if we're giving more rights to people that have more money or are investing more, and then they get rewards and then they're investing more, it's just kind of a domino effect of centralization, which is incredibly not what we're trying to achieve with blockchain, crypto, etc. So this is very foolproof. You're actually answering a lot of the questions that I had for you, but it's great. It's great. Um, feel free to keep going. I think this makes perfect sense so far.
All right. So then, yeah. So once you've calculated everything and you say, okay, if I get it, this is what I expect to get, and I validated all of the transactions from the time that it started at the bank until right now. Then you ask the bank, hey, do these hashes match? And because you can calculate the hashes on your phone, you can get those numbers. You get the numbers from the bank, and you say, do these match? And the bank says, here are the numbers that we have. You tell me if they match. And then if they do, you say, okay, and just double checking, user one is the owner, right? The bank comes back with a yes or a no, and you go on from there. So if the bank comes back and says yes, then you say, okay, user one, here's the next block. This is my public key that I want you to tell the bank is the new owner. Here's the hash that I calculated for my block. Please, tell the bank this is the newest hash, and then I'll wait. And so user two tells user one, because you're the only one who can append to the proofs ledger, and you're the one who's the current owner, please append. And then once you've appended, update the ownership ledger to be my public key. And then user two just waits and says, hey, bank, can I see the hashes for this? And the hashes come back, and the hash that they calculated has now been added. They say, am I is my public key the correct one? The bank says yes. Great. Now I can prove that my version of the transaction ledger is correct.
Right. So what you're able to do is you're still allowed the independence of doing person-to-person network transfers, transactions, with the benefit of having some sort of regulation with the bank and verification and legitimacy. And also, you're getting the benefit of fast payment processing because you're not generating and using all this energy usage, calculating hashes, and getting so many people involved in the blockchain who really truly don't care.
Right.
So essentially solving every problem that we're having maybe in blockchain, which is awesome.
Yeah. So like I said, that takes it to the end of the transaction. Like we talked about, there's no wasted computations. It's whatever is right is right. You don't have to keep going. You're not waiting for anybody else. Your transaction is the only one that's going to be on the chain. You have the opportunity to store, online, offline, your own chains. And we're using less, if people adopt this, then we're using less paper money. We're already using less paper money. It's down to like each year it's shrinking the amount of transactions that happen with paper and coins. But if you think about how much it costs in terms of carbon footprint to grow the cotton, to make the dollar bills, to mine the coins, to take them to the mint and create the actual bills and coins, to drive them from the mint to the different banks. Every time you get on whatever, whether it's a car or a bus or an airplane or a train, that money is added weight that we don't really need to have with us. And so it's like part of this was just, all right, I realized that Bitcoin uses way too much energy. I want to get way less than that, but there are other solutions that get less than that. But I also wanted to say, okay, how can we reduce the carbon footprint of regular money as well? So I kind of got into that. Then I'll share this slide for anyone who wants it.
Perfect. And actually, at the end of this video too, in the video description for the podcast, I'll have all your information there too. So if you can't access Lars' information here, you can find it at the end of the podcast episode in the details. I'll have his LinkedIn, his website, everything there, email. So if you are interested. And actually, that was what I was going to ask you. So obviously, this is an amazing concept, but it has bank involvement. So have you spoken to any banks yet? Or I know on your LinkedIn page, you were saying that you're looking for investors, you're looking for people that are interested in this idea. Have you had any luck in that yet? Or how has that been going?
I haven't yet. So I really just launched this concept 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it was very recent. I know when I reached out to you, it was like very, very recent.
Yeah, so I haven't yet. I have some contacts at different banks, and so I'm working through finding the right people, because obviously banks are multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporations that have thousands and thousands of people, and there's a handful of people who are working on kind of these types of projects. So it's getting step by step into the right places. But so that's why I'm talking on your podcast, why I'm trying to get to a couple of different conferences in the coming months to talk and just network and meet people.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm pretty sure I heard that Chase Bank is like one of the first banks that is starting to involve blockchain into their records and transactions and payment processing. I guess at least how they're keeping track of things. I don't know necessarily if they're utilizing it in other ways. So I think they're definitely, in myself working in banking for a couple of years, I think 1000% there are opportunities in banks that would be interested. It's also just finding banks that are big enough too that are interested, but like you're in a perfect spot, to like, you're not in a small town, for example. You're in a good spot to be finding these people. So I mean, I guess I will ask you, outside of your idea, what do you see for crypto in the future? Do you think that we are moving more towards digital cash and Bitcoin and DeFi, or what do you think is going to be good about it, and what can you see, and maybe what are some challenges that you think we'll come across?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely moving more and more towards some sort of digital cash. I don't think that countries will give up the control that they have over currency valuations to be able, or to see kind of like a widespread adoption of Bitcoin is the only coin for the whole world. So there needs to be some other solution with that, whether that is blockchain supported or some other system. I hope it is blockchain supported. And like one of the examples that people have talked to me about, and they're like, well, I already have stuff. Like I've got too many wallets on my phone. I've got different things for paying different people, whether it's PayPal or Zelle or whatever else. And like Zelle is, I think, a great example of a spot or a way that people use digital transactions to move money with people that they're not necessarily in continual, interactions with. And there was a big lawsuit, I think it was actually dropped this spring, against the four biggest banks in the country with using Zelle by the CFPB. And they came out and said, you didn't do enough to prevent fraud from your users or to protect your users. And one of the issues was that every time that you send money with Zelle or with a wire transfer, a lot of the banks they have like the double debits where it's like, I have a bank and you have a bank, and I'll credit your account at my bank, you credit my account at your bank. And so neither one of us do anything, but the money moved. And it's that the money moving from point A to point B and then point C very quickly after, usually, where that's where people got in trouble with Zelle. It was that, if you caught it quickly enough and you moved money from bank A to bank B, they could refund the transaction. But as soon as the money left and went to bank C, you couldn't get the money back. And so somebody had to eat that cost, whether it was an insurance agent, at the bank, on one end, the bank on the other, in the middle, or the consumer. And that was really unfortunate. And so, like, I really like the idea of this, where it's the money stays at the bank. The money isn't moving. It's just the ownership of the money that moves. And so at that point, if you can prove that there was fraud, then you can go back and say, okay, this fraud just happened. The money is still at the same bank. It hasn't moved. We can revert back, and you're not impacting any other coins in the ecosystem. Obviously, you would need some sort of regulations that the banks already go through when it comes to moving money without someone's permission. Like, if I say it's fraud and the other person says, well, no, it's not, I really did this service for you, they have to figure it out. And so, like, the courts would get involved at that point or whatever. But I really like the idea that if the money stays in one place and it's just the ownership that moves, recovering from fraud becomes a lot easier. And I think that you said, what's the future of these transactions, whether it's cash? If I get, somebody steals my wallet on the street, all of the money all of the cash is gone forever. There's no way to recover it. And so I do think that there will be a push to digital so that you can stop that and you can recoup as much as possible. And I love the idea that as you're able to recoup more, the profitability of fraud goes down. And once the profitability gets low enough, then there stops being a market for it. And then we can have an easier world where we don't have to worry about it so much.
Right. And one thing that's a hot take that I have talked about on the podcast is, and there's really no backing behind this, this is just my own natural curiosity. I think it's really interesting for like PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, all these companies that profit so much off of us just to verify that transactions are occurring and to basically shuffle my money from me to you, and also the fees that are involved with that, because I know on certain blockchains the fees are much lower to do person to person. So I always found it really interesting too, that we give so much power to a lot of these like corporate giants just to be verifying transactions when we could start doing that ourselves, and especially with some sort of a bank backing it. And you're right, just switching ownership, it's like it confuses me why we still operate this way. So I think what you said is really good. I actually just want to ask you one more question that just came to mind. So for this idea, obviously the whole point of the podcast is to bring people on to hear their credibility in crypto and how they got here, but also to try to end all the fraud, scams, and schemes that are happening in the market. And obviously with all the other blockchains, we face scams on so many different levels, from like hackers, Bitcoin mining hackers and stuff like that. Have you, and it's okay, I know this idea just came out, but have you put any thought into how you can secure this idea so we are away from fraud and scams and schemes? Are you going to be relying more on the bank to be regulating that, or have you had any ideas around that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the main reasons why I want to partner with banks. It's like I said, they've got the identity and access management and the spending profiles already in use. Like that's already a part of their world. And so if you're able to really focus on who's doing what and where and how, then it's faster and easier to stop it. And so like obviously I don't expect the banks to do this out of their own goodwill. So if you think about, you put a $20 bill in the bank, they're earning interest on that $20 that you've deposited. And that interest is what pays for the queries to support the next transaction, the transaction after that. In the event that there is somebody who is unknown to the bank, that would represent a higher level of risk. It would take them, the bank would have to wait longer for the interest to build up enough to support the next transaction. And so in that manner, if I send you money, you might be able to spend it again within a fraction of a second or within a couple of seconds. But if I'm sending money to somebody that the bank has never interacted with before, they might have some know your customer regulations and stuff like that, where they're like, all right, this person is completely new to us. It is a risky situation. So one, we have to contact their bank to make sure that they're legitimate. We have to contact this other group to make sure that it's okay. And all of that costs the bank money. So while they're validating the customer, the second customer, that second customer can't spend that money again yet. And so the longer the money sits in the account, the person can show that I'm the legitimate owner of it. So I can go forward with life and say that the last transaction happened, but they can't respend it yet. And the longer that they can't respend it, the more opportunity the bank has to say, wait a second, that really was fraud.
That's great.
A storm just rolled through. And so I don't know if you noticed my lights just flashed.
Oh God, no, I didn't. I didn't see that. I was pondering a thought, because this is a little off topic, but bear with me. When I worked at the bank, and there were such regulations around checks, depositing checks, because understanding if the funds were actually there or not. And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that the money is actually there before the next person is able to cash out or redeposit or retransact, which was a big issue that we had at the bank. People coming in to cash a check that wasn't even legitimate, that had non-sufficient funds. So in a digital way now with crypto, you're trying to achieve that. And it's not to say, I think your answer was great, because it's not to say that there won't ever be fraud or, a duplication or those things happening in the blockchain. I mean, it's technology that we're perfecting in real time. So I think with the bank's involvement, it's a great answer that they will at least be able to help minimize all the massive fraud and scams and schemes and illegitimacies that are happening, to give crypto and blockchain the chance that it deserves. So yeah. I think that was amazing. That was a great realistic answer to give, especially with blockchain, to give it a chance. And a lot of people steer away from it because it doesn't have that regulation or that backing yet. And this is a chance for the banks to get involved, to give it the opportunity that it really has to make people more independent, have more ownership of their money, but also have that safety to know that the traditions are still there for a sense of comfort. So that was all the questions that I wanted to ask you. I think, Lars, that you explained this idea very well. Is there anything else that you wanted to include that you feel like you didn't get to?
The only other thing was one thing that you and I talked about on a couple weeks ago, was this concept of quantum computers and the fear that people have. And this doesn't tie in with mine really at all. Aside from, so with mine, since every chain is on its own, updating algorithms is very easy, because you can do it piece by piece. You can do it one at a time. And as soon as something happens, you can say, all right, Chase Bank is going to update, and on the next transaction, everybody is going to this higher level of security. And whereas with Bitcoin, you have to have these meetings and say, okay, are we forking? Are we all accepting this sort of quantum key thing? But one of the things that scares me with quantum keys for Bitcoin is that a lot of people procrastinate. And I know that what's going to happen is in 5-10 years, somebody, maybe next year, somebody's going to come up with a quantum computer that can crack people's wallets, and the people with the quantum safe keys will be secure, and the people without say, hey, what do I need to do? And there are plenty of companies I know that are working on quantum safe wallets. And a lot of it, I haven't dug into them. I don't know who's doing what or how, but I know that when it comes time and when it hits the news that, you need to have this update, otherwise you might get hacked very quickly. There will be scammers who come out and say, oh, I've got something, and it will look like a real quantum key and it will look this certain way. But people who wait until the last minute to adapt to quantum safe cryptography are likely to get scammed during that transaction or during that transition period. So I think if you have money in any sort of blockchains and you want to secure it against quantum cryptography and the future of that, doing that sooner rather than later is the right step.
Right. And I was just about to say, I'm glad that you brought that up. I personally have not done much due diligence in regarding quantum computing. It actually was supposed to be our next podcast episode that we were supposed to cover, but I know that in this community it's a massive concern, so I definitely just wanted to hear your thoughts about it. And definitely I have to do more research too as we're developing, but I know that it was a threat to blockchains. And but it's good that you're doing your due diligence and looking into that, because obviously with what you're trying to create, that is definitely something you would have to take into consideration. So, and actually, why we call it cryptic humility, why we call this show cryptic humility, is because it's not about having all the answers and, knowing everything in the crypto market. It's about coming together and creating dialogue and conversation with people about, what are the issues and of course the opportunities, and how can we fix these things to give crypto the chance that it really deserves. So, and I always tell everybody, I've researched in crypto for 6 years, but I don't know everything. New things come out every single day. New coins come out every single day, where I'm trying to learn and keep up to date. But together with sharing knowledge between each other, we can create something long lasting as a community and also in crypto. So definitely quantum computers will be the next thing that I talk about. We have many guests coming up too, which I'm very excited about. But this was amazing. I want to say thank you for coming onto the show and giving your insight. I know many people will deem it to be extremely valuable. And as I said, I will make sure to post everything that you have talked about and all your resources from LinkedIn to your email to your website on the podcast details. So if anybody's trying to contact you, they can have direct access to you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys have any questions, you can comment directly below on Spotify. And if not, we will see you next Monday on Cryptic Humility. Thank you.